Today we are going to talk about heel strike. What this little teeny tiny moment in the walking cycle is for those of you who have walking problems due to damage to your brain or your spinal cord. If you're new to this channel, I'm Tara. I'm a neurologic physical therapist, and on this channel I bring you as much information as I can to empower you to take a little bit more ownership of your neurologic rehabilitation by giving you the tools to get the most out of your home exercise program. That being said, today we're going to talk about heel strike, also called initial contact. It is the moment in the walking cycle right at the end of the swinging phase when, under normal circumstances, the heel hits the ground. And the reason it's such a problem in the walking cycle for anyone who has suffered damage to their brain or their spinal cord in most cases is not necessarily due to weakness, which is what a lot of people think, is that they can't get their foot up and so their foot hits the ground first or their toe hits the ground first instead of their heel hitting the ground first. But I think there is a more common problem that creates this issue or this inability to get a good heel strike. And it goes back to something that I talk about quite a bit on this channel, abnormal synergy patterns. So just a quick review, because I have done a whole video on abnormal synergy patterns. I will link that video in the description below. But quick review, there are two main abnormal synergy patterns that happen after a stroke or a brain injury. Some believe that abnormal synergy patterns are just a stage in the movement recovery process that everyone needs to go through. And it is when multiple muscles fire at the same time. So I always bring it back to watching a baby who's actually learning normal development. At the beginning, you just see these gross, big mass movements. They either flex up or they extend. Very similar if you're progressing through the stages of movement recovery, is that you have these gross movements where multiple muscles are just firing at the same time. Two of the abnormal synergy patterns are a flexor synergy pattern and an extensor synergy pattern. So we're just going to focus on the lower extremities, and I'm going to tie this in. It's good to know this, but I'm going to tie it in to why this makes that heel strike such a problem when you are relearning how to normalize your walking pattern. So there's the flexor synergy pattern, which again is a normal part of the movement recovery process. And in a flexor synergy pattern, the muscles that link together are the muscles that flex the hip. So the muscles that bring the leg forward when walking, or bring the knee up if you're laying down, or up towards your chest, bend the knee and flex the ankle. That is a flexor synergy pattern, meaning that if any component of that tries to happen, they all kind of happen together. An extensor synergy pattern is characterized by hip extension, so the leg moving backwards, knee extension, or the leg straightening out, and the foot pointing. If any one of those components, or you try and do any one of those components, if you're in the stage where you're in synergy patterns, all of those are going to happen together. So if you go to straighten your knee out, your hip's going to extend and your foot's going to point, all at the same time. So again, it is a normal stage in the movement recovery process, but the hope is always that you move through this stage as quickly as possible. The longer you stay in this stage, the more ingrained those patterns become. So now, how does this impact you when you get to the point of walking and really trying to normalize your walking pattern, specifically at heel strike? So let's talk about what's going on at heel strike, and then I promise you it's going to make the exercises that I show at the end of this video make a lot more sense. But what is going on at heel strike? So when the foot wants to hit the ground, or the heel wants to hit the ground at that initial contact after swing phase, your hip is flexing, your knee needs to extend, and your ankle needs to flex up. So what's going on? It's not a flexor synergy pattern, and it's not an extensor synergy pattern. You actually have knee extension, but you don't want the hip extending, you don't want the foot pointing. You need the hip to flex, but you don't want the knee to flex because the knee needs to extend and the ankle needs to dorsiflex or come upward. And herein lies the problem. And again, the longer you are in those synergy patterns, the more ingrained those patterns become. Therefore, this point in the walking cycle, because it is what we call out of a synergy pattern, it can be problematic. So what I see a lot, and in fact, I just saw this on Instagram by someone who regularly tags Orlando Neurotherapy in his recovery videos that he posts on his Instagram, and he's working on this right now. And what's happening is his knee wants to stay flexed when he's trying to get that initial contact, and it almost looks like it's like hanging out in the air, like it can't reach the ground. And that is an extremely common problem. And what is causing that? Difficulty moving out of a synergy pattern. So his hip is flexing because his leg is coming forward, and possibly, I'm not saying it's his specific case, this is not my patient, but what possibly could be happening is because he's flexing his hip, his knee wants to stay flexed as well. And also, because he's trying to lift his foot up to get that good heel strike, that's part of a flexor synergy pattern. So it's harder to extend the knee. And hence, it might feel like your leg just can't touch the ground, or it might feel like you're doing this, like what we call a steppage gait, where your knee's just coming up real high. That's really just because your knee is bending. It's almost like you're kind of bringing your knee in towards your chest, because that entire flexor synergy pattern is all trying to happen at the same time. So what is the solution? The solution is working exercises out of a synergy pattern. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to break up that synergy pattern. Now for this point, there's, depending on where you're at in the walking cycle, like what component you're trying to focus in on, this would be different. But specifically for heel strike, what you need to be able to relearn how to do is how to flex the hip, because your leg is out in front of you, you're bringing it forward, while at the same time extending the knee, right? That's out of a flexor synergy pattern, because if your hip is flexing in a synergy pattern, flexor synergy pattern, then your knee's gonna wanna flex. So you gotta actually flex the hip and learn how to straighten the knee in that position. The other thing you need to learn how to do, or that's good to relearn how to do, is learn how to flex the ankle, dorsiflex the ankle, with the knee extended. Now, if you're stuck in that flexor synergy stage, when you try and flex your ankle, because a lot of therapists teach heel toe. I don't necessarily teach that, but a lot of therapists do teach that, like heel toe. So a lot of people learn, or they know that they need to get their heel down. So when you're trying to get your heel down, you're trying to lift your foot up, what's gonna happen if you're in that flexor synergy pattern is your knee's gonna wanna bend. So you need to lock that knee out straight, even if you have to physically put something on your knee to keep it straight and work on your ankle flexion in that position. Now, the other thing that you would want to do is stretch your ankle with your knee extended. Could also be, this is unrelated, this isn't part of a flexor synergy pattern, but because we're here and because this is also a huge problem, you also want to make sure you stretch your ankle into dorsiflexion with your knee fully locked out. Sometimes it's just that you have tightness around the back side of your ankle, or the muscles on the back side of your ankle, and therefore you don't have the length in your muscles to dorsiflex or flex the foot upward with your knee straight. So whatever you need to do to keep that knee straight, and whether it's passively stretching the ankle towards dorsiflexion or working that active ankle dorsiflexion, that is what you're going to want to focus on. And then the other thing that I think is really, really important is just learning how to flex and extend the hip. So just learning how to isolate that hip while keeping the knee straight. So there's a few different ways you can do this. I would start by doing this laying down and suspending your leg somehow with a bungee and just working on hip extension, hip flexion, hip extension, just back and forth without letting your knee bend. Again, you want to isolate that hip without going into those patterns. If your foot is pointing, definitely do this with your AFO on or some kind of a night splint on so that you can also just be adding in, you get like kind of a 2-for-1. You're adding in, keeping that ankle flexed. And so your brain can really feel how to keep that ankle flexed while you're just isolating that hip. And then of course, everything is always harder in standing. So what does that mean? If you have spasticity, your spasticity is going to be stronger in standing. And if you have any type of a compensatory pattern or an abnormal synergy pattern, most likely, because standing is just a little bit more stressful, you're going to go back to doing those synergy patterns. So then I would carry this isolated hip movement into standing activities. Again, the goal is that heel strike where the knee needs to be straight and the ankle needs to be flexed. So for this exercise, what we're focusing on is just relearning how to move the hip while also keeping the knee straight. So a lot of times after a stroke or a brain injury, sometimes you can move in patterns. So what will happen when you try and bring your leg forward is your knee will bend because normally hip flexion and knee flexion go together. So again, basically this is just relearning how to isolate just moving the hip without the knee bending and straightening. So trying to keep focused on keeping the knee straight while you just move the entire leg back and forth. You can see I have something on my foot, kind of holding it in flexion, or what we call dorsiflexion. That again is to break up a pattern. So again, standing up on something probably about 2 inches tall minimum just allows this leg to kind of freely move past the ground without catching on the ground. And again, you're just moving the whole leg forwards and backwards, really isolating hip flexion and hip extension without what happens a lot is the knee will bend. But what you want to do is just really isolate without letting that knee bend. Now for some people, that's really, really hard, especially in standing. So an option that you might want to try is just buying a cheap knee immobilizer on Amazon in the early stages. Now this knee immobilizer is a little bit big for me. You definitely want one that fits you well because I can bend my knee in this a little bit. So if you can feel your knee bending inside of it, then the knee immobilizer is too big. You really want to make sure that that knee immobilizer is really, really tight because you don't want your knee to bend at all. So I hope that was helpful. Again, if you're new to this channel, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, turn on that notification bell so that you'll get notified every time I upload new videos. And then comment below, what are some of the issues that you have with your walking that you would like me to do exercises for? Because I'd be happy to add that in a future video, as well as make sure you're tagging me in your videos on Instagram because you never know when that might be an inspiration behind a future video. So definitely tag Orlando Neurotherapy. I enjoyed spending time with you all today, and I will see you in the next video.
And now there's something in the air and a sparkly shimmer on our skin.